Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here at the Foston Civic Center, and thanks for everyone joining us online as well. I'm Leif Bakken. You may recognize my voice if you listen to KKCQ. I have the Agriculture Corner that we do, and so glad to have helped Don Brinkman put this forum together. And my first time out here in Minnesota, I came from a farm network out in Montana and moved out here back in June. And so I've been trying to learn the ropes and get everything figured out. So thanks for accepting me into the community, and look forward to meeting many of you as we continue on. But we're going to get started here with our KKCQ Farm Forum, and Don Wick from the Red River Farm Network will start us off talking about some of the issues that producers out there need to be worried about and thinking about as we move into spring. And we'll also hear from legislators. Tom Peterson is here. He'll be our keynote speaker, and Angie Peltier from University of Minnesota Extension is here as well. So it's going to be great, and we thank you for coming here, and please feel free again to get up, refill your coffee, and have a donut, and we thank you so much. On that note, I'll let Don take it away as, again, Red River Farm Network, so round of applause for him, and thanks for coming, Don.
Thank you, Leif, and Don and the whole crew from R&J Broadcasting, KKCQ, for this Farm Forum. It's great to be here for live events once again. I always love this forum. You always have some tremendous speakers, and you got that on tap again for us today. Leif asked me to talk about some of the things we work on the news side, and so it's kind of like me sitting down every morning for our country morning broadcast. I come to work about 3:30 in the morning, get prepped for that morning show, and our whole team goes to work on that 6:30 to 7 o'clock broadcast. So I've been doing this about 40 years. I love getting up in the morning and talking about agriculture, because this is the best business in the world, and we really serve some of the best farmers and ranchers in the entire world as far as I'm concerned. So just a little bit about our team with the Red River Farm Network. I've been with the network 19 years, bought the network. Mike Herger and I owned it together for a few years, and I bought it 5 years ago. Randy Coonan is one of our broadcasters. He's been here 15 years. Kara Hart has been here about 8 years, and Sierra Doctor is our newest hire. She joined us this past fall. So Leif asked me to update you on some of the stories that we're looking at. I still, if you look back at this past year, drought still has to be the #1 story that we dealt with in the world of agriculture in our footprint. Even with a pandemic and a lot of political upheaval and those kind of things, it's still what Mother Nature did to us, or was doing to us, that was the biggest consideration as far as the stories we covered with the Red River Farm Network. We saw a lot of stress, obviously, with crop production, and obviously in the ranch country as well. We put a lot of road miles on this past year and saw some very uneven crops, and also saw a lot of pastures that just dried up. I remember coming here to Bagley Livestock just up the road when Senator Tina Smith was here to meet with ranchers, and sitting at that sale that day, there was a lot of cows that were being sold that day at Bagley Livestock at a time of year when you don't normally see a lot of cows coming through the ring, just because we ran out of grass, and so we were selling off that factory, and that's really hard to do. So that was a story really across our entire footprint. Our network serves certainly this northwest Minnesota territory, but on in through North Dakota and northern South Dakota as well, and everybody was fighting that drought. Fortunately, a lot of good folks got some moisture before freeze up, and we all know we've had one more blizzard than we want, I think, this year. Every week we've been fighting wind and snow and some weather, so maybe that'll give us some optimism, some moisture as we get into the spring season. One of the other big stories that we're working on now is obviously the headaches we have with the supply chain, the bottlenecks that are going on, getting from point A to point B and getting you the products you need to put a crop in the ground and do your business. We started seeing it going into fall last year with shortages for things like glufosinate and glyphosate. It's spilled into things like computer chips to run your tractors or your pickup trucks and those kind of things. It seems like it's one of those years that we get one thing solved and something else pops up and we get another issue. I look at this business of agriculture, and we've evolved to a situation where we were always looking at just-in-time type of delivery. We wanted to get the product to you just when you needed it. But now with some of these supply chain issues, it's going from just-in-time to just-in-case. It's kind of hard to always get what we need right now, and that's been a particular challenge, I think. This past week, we saw a lot of news in our airwaves anyway, dealing with Bayer and glyphosate. The folks from Bayer put out a statement that they were going to call force majeure because one of their manufacturers had put together one key ingredient, had some repair issues, some equipment malfunctions, so they're not going to be able to fulfill all of the orders for glyphosate, for Roundup. I have had a chance with some of the farm shows we've been at this week. International Crop Expo is going on in Grand Forks, and talked to some of the local folks. I think some of it was maybe a little bit of communication overblown. The folks from Bayer in our region telling us that they think they're going to be able to get the glyphosate, that the product is there. No doubt there's still some issues getting it from point A to point B with trucker issues and some of those kind of things, but they're pretty confident we'll have the Roundup, the glyphosate that we're going to need to get the crop in our footprint. The United States is the #1 market for a company like Bayer, so they want to take care of their #1 customer, and I think hopefully that means we're in good shape here as we get into spring. We're pretty dependent on glyphosate for a lot of the crops that we grow. Having said that, I think a lot of growers are trying to make sure they got product in the shed just as soon as they can. We saw a lot of early booking going on this last fall, and the point was to not only book it, but make sure we took control of it, made sure it was on our property so we didn't have some logistical issue somewhere down the pipe. Shipping containers is still another part of that logistical story, that supply chain issues. We've had such a challenge trying to get those shipping containers that are very important moving products throughout the world. The products are coming in with consumer goods and those kind of things from, say, China, and instead of filling them up with dry beans or products that we grow here in our region, it's been cheaper for Bayer or for China to ship them back empty, and it's kind of hard for us, I think, to, as a head scratcher for a lot of us, to make that work. Understand that, but that's been a big problem, not having those containers here when we need it. The administration has been trying to do some things. They've put up a pop-up type of center where they are trying to move things a little quicker through the supply chain at the ports, particularly in the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach out on the West Coast, where we move a lot of these container-type products. So that's been another issue we've been talking about. Fertilizer bill, that's been pretty a big challenge. I don't know if I've ever seen in my lifetime where we've gone from, point A to point B and just seen the explosion in price that we've had with fertilizer. I don't know what you guys have had here locally. I do believe we did see a lot of fertilizer that got down this past fall. We had a nice long fall, and CHS Ag Services that serves this northwest Minnesota area talked to some of their folks, and they had a record amount of fertilizer that went down this fall. So hopefully that cues us up for some good things going into the spring season. The other big story, I think, is what's happening in value-added agriculture. Minnesota has been really a leader in value-added agriculture, going back to the ethanol plants and the development we saw of the ethanol industry. And now the driver is also a biofuel, but it's renewable diesel. They want soybean oil to fill the needs for the renewable diesel market, particularly in California. So we've seen a huge number of crush plants that are being developed, are being built, or are in the proposal stage at this point. We don't know if they all are going to get put together, if they'll get the financing they need or whatever, but there's a lot of projects that are in play at this point. In this area, we've seen a lot of talk about Ipm Energy and the soybean crush facility and the work that they're doing in Crookston. The Minnesota soybean folks have done a tremendous job in getting that project going. I think the Ipm Energy side of that still's got some financing work that they need to get done, but we got a lot of other other things that are popping up in our area, and hopefully they all do some things to improve our basis and such. Just looking back over the last 6 months or so, ADM announced a $350 million crush facility at Spiritwood out near that Jamestown, North Dakota area. They're going to take the vegetable oil that's produced at that plant and send it to Marathon Oil in Dickinson, North Dakota, and then eventually it's going to end up in California. We also saw just not too long ago, Minnesota soybean processors announced a collaboration with a company called CGB Enterprises. They're building a new soy crush plant in Castleton, North Dakota. So we've got a couple projects going on there. There's also a relatively new plant that was built just a couple of years ago with AGP at Aberdeen, South Dakota. So those are some of the projects going on in this region. There's others in Minnesota as well. I think there's been some expansion going on in Mankato and some of those type of areas. So it's really that explosion that we've seen in the veg oil market. It's really a game changer. I think there's been some talk that if all of these plants just in North Dakota come into fruition, it's going to take every bit of every soybean we grow in the state to feed that domestic market, which is really different when you think about North Dakota. We're generally an exporting state, and all those beans end up on a rail car and head to the Pacific Northwest. If we can utilize those beans locally, that should mean some good things. The other question is what happens with that soybean meal. We don't have a very large animal ag industry, particularly on things like swine and poultry in North Dakota. So hopefully maybe that'll help develop some of that activity on this, as we grow these biofuel plants as well. So that's going on. Just last week, South Dakota soybean processors, they announced they're going to do another processing plant. They already have one at 2 plants in the state of South Dakota. This new one's going to be a soybean and sunflower crush plant that's going to be down south of Mitchell. So that's kind of interesting. And just down Highway 2 is a project being worked on the corn side of things in Grand Forks, working with a Chinese company called Fufeng that is working to put a corn wet milling plant on the north side of Grand Forks. They've gotten preliminary approval from the city council. They've had meetings the last 3 weeks, and this last week they got the preliminary approval for the project development. So there's still a long ways to go on that one, but that's the latest thing that we've seen in our region as well as far as value-added agriculture. In agriculture, regulations are another story we deal with all the time, particularly on the national side. We're seeing that story of waters of the United States popping up once again, going back to try to redefine what that means. The administration is working on that. EPA is working on that redefinition. There's also some things going on the regulatory side with still dicamba and some of the other ag chem type of things that we're looking at. One of the other things in agriculture, we get touched by all those different things in the world, I think. You watch the news every night, and we're seeing the standoff between Russia and on the Ukraine border. It has a big impact on what's going on in our marketplace as far as wheat in particular. Russia's the largest wheat exporter in the world. Ukraine's the third largest in the world, so that's a pretty big situation. The Black Sea area is a big deal as far as the wheat market. Unlike things like corn and soybeans, there's no shortage of wheat worldwide, but again, the logistics, if that market shuts down, that would have some impact on us. So we're all watching what's happening with the folks in Ukraine and Russia, so keeping our prayers going that direction, actually. On the livestock side, we've seen a lot of stories on the issue of competition. We've seen it for years on the story of, there's 4 major beef packers that run, that take about 85% of the beef packing capacity worldwide. The Biden administration has been pretty vocal on wanting to address things with the competition issue. Just 2 weeks ago, actually, they had a settlement with JBS, one of the big meat packers. JBS agreed in a settlement with the Justice Department. They're going to pay $50 million to settle allegations of price fixing, but at the same time, they didn't want to admit that they did anything wrong. So I guess if you're throwing $50 million at something, there must be some kind of issue. And on top of that, just 2 years ago, they paid about $25 million on a price-fixing allegation in the swine business. So there's something to look at on that side. There's, again, with the administration, the Biden administration looking at competition, talking about some of the mergers that have taken place. He also has talked about things like right to repair. I don't know if you saw, there's a farmer in North Dakota that is starting a class action lawsuit against John Deere, wanting to look at having that ability to repair their own equipment. So that story's been another one that we've been talking about. I found it interesting to see the president talking about the right to repair. I don't know if we've seen that very often in our lifetime. We've got some great lawmakers that we're going to hear from here in a bit, but I know there's a lot of state issues we've been reporting on here at the network as well. This week it's been the story of redistricting, what's been happening there here in the 7th District. Some changes somewhat, of course, currently served by Representative Michelle Fischbach. That border goes from Canada all the way to southwest Minnesota, just one county off of the Iowa border. The 8th District, represented by Pete Stauber, has expanded west somewhat. It's going to include portions of Mahnomen, Beltrami, Clearwater, and Becker counties, and it also spills all the way down, I think, into that Stillwater area in Minnesota as well. So I think even for us as the Red River Farm Network, we'll probably be talking to Pete Stauber a little bit more than we did in the past as well. Drought relief has been another story. The governor focused on drought relief a lot in some of the work in the early part of the session. There's still kind of a standoff, and the chairman of the House Ag Committee, Mike Sundin, introduced that bill. It passed through the Ag Committee. It would include $5 million for grants and direct assistance for another $5 million out of the Rural Finance Authority in a revolving loan program. I won't get into too much of that because I think you got experts here that can discuss those kind of things, but that's one of the big issues. I still think talk of E85, year-round E85 in Minnesota is a big deal. The Future Fuels Initiative is another story I'm thinking we'll be hearing a little bit more about. It's great to see the Ag Commissioner here, Tom Peterson. I was happy to see the new FSA administrator was announced in Minnesota, and it's Whitney Place, who worked as assistant commissioner in the Ag Department's office, just taking that role. I've been doing this for a long time. I used to work in Worthington, Minnesota, and she was a 4-H kid in Okabena, Minnesota, down in Jackson County. So I remember interviewing her there, and I was able to have the first interview with her once she came online as the FSA administrator, the exec here in Minnesota. So it was kind of cool to see. Yet in North Dakota, there's not one in South Dakota, so it's a rather long vetting process. It generally, we've looked back at some of the past administrations, and it's not unusual to go into maybe November, December of that year to get people in place, but it's now getting to be a little longer than that, so it'd be nice to fill not only the FSA but rural development posts. We don't have rural development filled in Minnesota either, so those are some of the things that we've been reporting on. Again, just a bit about the Red River Farm Network. We serve 21 radio markets, with R&J Broadcasting. We're on KRJB in Ada and KRJM in Mahnomen, and Jim Bergmeyer runs a first-class operation. We're really proud to work with him. And of course, Leaf came on board. I knew Leaf's work when he was working in Montana, and we're excited to see him come here to Minnesota. You got a good one right there, so that's great to see. So those are some of the stories that we've been working on at the Red River Farm Network. You can always find our stuff online as well at rrfn.com. And we publish a weekly email newsletter. If there's some interest in that, just let me know and we can get you signed up for that publication. It's a really good snapshot on what's going on in the business of agriculture. So with that, unless there's any questions, we can go on to the first speaker if that works. Leaf, give me a thumbs up. Sorry? The corn milling plant? I'm like you, I guess I was pretty surprised. Grand Forks isn't necessarily in the heart of the Corn Belt. When a Chinese company came and wanted to do a development project in Grand Forks for a corn wet milling project, you know, when you look in the northern Red River Valley in particular, first of all, we don't have a lot of storage like you would see in an I-state or southern Minnesota for corn. You don't see a lot of corn bins up there. It's changing, but that's not like it used to be. We could be very dependent on weather in this region for corn. We've seen that as well. So I guess I was somewhat surprised on that. They do have connection to rail, and there's connection to the natural gas pipeline. As I understand, it's going to be hooking up to that new facility in Grand Forks. So it's not a done thing yet. I don't think they've gone through preliminary work through the city council. And I think they have to get to this point in the work in the city council where they're not going to actually see some more of the plans from this Chinese group. So I think you have to go through steps A, B, and C till you can maybe open the books a little more to see what they're exactly planning. So we're a work in progress is what I would say. Yeah. Question about China operating that plant. I think it's a surprise. Although at the same time, I think you look at any community, when they can get some development, they certainly will open the door and have that conversation. And when you look at, this came up in Grand Forks this week at the International Crop Expo, and I could kind of look around the room and point to just about every company in there had some connection to being a Europe-based company or Brazilian-based company, or all over the globe. So this world's gotten a whole lot smaller, and at least for you and me, it's been changed over when we started in this business. There's no doubt. All right. Well, again, I'll be able to help moderate today. We've got some wonderful presenters. Our first one is the Deputy Majority Leader from Minnesota, Senator Mark Johnson. Mark, we're pleased to have you up here today. I know you got a busy schedule. Why don't I switch chairs and you can get front and center of the camera. How's that work?
Well, thank you, Don. I don't know how much I have left to say. I think you took all my notes. No, I'd like to thank you. You're really a trusted, you and your team have been very trusted. Turn on the radio in the morning, heading down to the cities, and hear you or one of your team on there. It's really been fantastic. Keep appraised of what's going on, of agriculture in Minnesota. Also, Leaf and the KKCQ team, thank you so much for all that you do for our community. Think of the last 2 years without our radio stations, keeping us up to date on what's going on across the state, in our own region. They've been a big part of our lives, so thank you very much for everything that you guys are doing, keeping us in tune, even though we're sitting inside watching everything on Zoom. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's been a really exciting start to the legislative year. It feels like we're finally getting back on track. I know up here a lot of you probably say the same thing. We're back in church, we're back in our schools, we're doing things pretty much normal again. Up north, I think that trend has carried through down to the Twin Cities. I know Representative Keel will be able to talk about the House a little bit, but the Senate has really been back into gear, and people are on the floor again. It seems like a full House most of the time, which is fun because the legislative activity is all about the relationships that you have. It's a relationship with your community, it's the relationships with your colleagues, the relationships with the staff that are there to solve those problems that are happening across the state. So this just feels like just a fresh breath of air as we're getting back together again and doing this. And the numbers you see with COVID are coming down. The variants and all that stuff are starting to drop off, which we hope that trend just continues. And we're able to do much more of this, getting together and being able to drink some coffee and have a few donuts. It's a great place to be. So as far as from the Senate on the agricultural side, it's early on in the session, so there's been a rather slow start to the ag side of things. There's about 3 things that they've really been discussing in depth. First of all, I'll start with broadband. Most of us are connected to broadband at this point, but there are still some needs across our state. And so we had a lot of federal funds that ended up going to broadband. From the state level, we dipped into a pot of about $70 million last year. There's still about $110 million that are eligible to be tagged for broadband. So if you know people, you have something going on with broadband, let me know. And we're going to start building that bill to see what we need across the state for connecting people to rural broadband. The other thing that we want to talk about, and Don, you touched on this too, was the drought relief. There is on the House side a package that looks at livestock producers for drought relief. We're bringing that over to the Senate fairly soon. Going to have some negotiations on that. So stay tuned for that one. I'm not sure how that one's going to end up at the end of the day, but I know that they are going to be taking that into consideration. I actually had Tori Westrom, the chair of the Senate Ag Committee, in my pickup. I pick them up in Elbow Lake most Monday mornings at about 7:30, and I get about 2.5 hours with them going down where we can talk about ag issues, and then 2.5 hours coming up on Thursday night. So I get a little feel of what's going on in the Ag Committee. I don't sit on that anymore. The other thing that I'm really excited about, and actually this is the first time that I've used this, but our local butchers and beef producers, cutting out the JBS and going through the market that way and going straight to the local. And we've put some grants into butchers, small town butchers and things like that to increase that capacity as well. And that has actually taken off really well. I'm hoping that we can do more in that realm, because our local producers are just fantastic people. It's a great way of cutting out some of those middlemen and going straight and getting fresh and beef that and so we've used that as a family and actually really excited about the things that will come up in that. There's a couple broader issues that we're looking at this year too. We can talk about the regular the big items. Let's talk about taxes for just a second. I know that's boring and your eyes start to fold over, but it's a really exciting thing, I think, this year. We've got a surplus of $7.7 billion right now that's forecasted for the ongoing. There's one issue that I've heard about since I've gotten to the session, but we've never had the resources to address it, and that's taxation on our Social Security benefits. So those of you that might be in the retirement age and are looking at that, and you've paid taxes, payroll taxes or whatever, into the system, and now when you're actually going to start taking them out, all of a sudden the dollars that you put aside through your taxes are being taxed again before you get that benefit. And so that's about $1 billion for our state to take that off the books, which it's an expensive price tag. But to us, we're only one of 13 states in the union that actually do that. And it's time that we get rid of that, and I think that's going to be a big push going forward. The other thing that we want to do is have ongoing tax relief for all Minnesotans. I know there's been a proposal from the governor to send out one-time checks of about $175 to individuals. Now that's something, but what we're proposing is let's give tax relief so you are getting something like that back month after month after month, because your taxes are lower on your paycheck and the things that you're doing. Let's make sure that you're keeping more of your money and not just getting back a one-time check. Think about the inflation that's going on right now. I just filled up on gas. It was over $100 for my pickup, and that's every week. I'm driving down to the cities and doing that stuff. I'm doing that at least once a week. And for families that are feeling the inflation, whether it's beef or milk or gas, you need that ongoing. $175 doesn't go very far. So we're going to take a look at that. So that's a little bit on the tax issue. The other thing that I briefly want to talk about too is the things that are happening on our administrative side, present company accepted. I will say, so Commissioner Tom Peterson, there's a reason why Commissioner Tom Peterson was the first commissioner that we sat down as a Senate and said, we're going to confirm him. Him and his team, we're sorry to lose Whitney Place too, by the way. She's been just terrific. But actually come to the table. They want to help. They want to serve the people. They want to serve the ag community. They want to serve Minnesotans. So we wholeheartedly supported Tom Peterson and his role and really appreciate the work that you do there. But there are some other things that are concerning through different agencies. one of the things that, whether you like it or not, we're having some issues with the agencies when it comes to agriculture, such as deer farming. If you look at deer farming, it's an industry that some people like, some people hate. That's fine. You can do what you want. But we've got an agency right now through the DNR that is single-handedly destroying that industry. It's taking away a livelihood from a whole group of people who have spent their life savings in producing deer for recreation. And through, what I would say illegal timing of cutting down on the transfers between deer farms, of making up little stories about why they have to do this, it has decimated our deer farms and our deer farmers, taking away their livelihood in a way that should worry you. If an agency doesn't like deer farming today, just wait. It might be, wheat farming tomorrow, or it might be something else. We got to keep our agencies accountable, because this stuff is serious, and we got to keep watching that. The other thing that I'd like to kind of bring up here too is the California Clean Car Emission Standards. Folks, that came around in the dead of night. We fought like crazy to keep that off the books. That's a major policy that says that Minnesota is going to follow the regulations that a board, an unelected board in California, has set up. And by the way, we don't have a voice on that board. We don't have a say. We don't have a lobbyist there. We don't have anybody there. But we have to follow what California is setting up. And now they're proposing that they want to get rid of all liquefied fuels. That's something that they're seriously considering. So when you're out there, whether you're working on the farm, or you're combining soybeans, or you're out in the sunflowers, John, and your electric combine, we'll see how far that goes. But these are agency overreaches that you should be concerned about. We can debate taxes all day long. We can debate other things all day long. But this is one of those issues that comes in the back door that you don't see until it's affecting your pocketbook, just like Waters of the U.S. did a few years ago. So we're fighting very hardly against things like that are happening. I want to make you aware of what's going on in our state agencies as well, because that, to me, is the biggest danger that we have in this state right now for rural Minnesota. We could go on, but this has been, I don't know how long you want to go here, Don.
Can I ask a few questions?
Yes, absolutely.
You've been a big part of at least the work going into the redistricting.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on what this means for particularly rural portions of Minnesota?
Yeah, so that was fun. So I was chair of the redistricting committee over in the Senate side, and my biggest concern was, if you look at the map, if you start seeing small, thin districts going from Minneapolis, St. Paul out, we were in big trouble. But if you saw blocks around the state, we're doing okay. And when the maps came out, it was mostly blocks across the state, which means that, yes, we lost some influence from rural Minnesota, just the way that it works, relative to Hennepin and Ramsey County and that area. They're growing, we're staying about the same. So our districts are getting bigger. In fact, mine went from Canada down to, part of Clay County down there. So it's about the size of, it's bigger than Rhode Island and about like Vermont or New Hampshire. So it's a big district, but it's a good district. I think they did a really good job of trying to keep counties and different areas whole. If we ended up with those long, stringy districts, what the Democrat side has been trying to do across the country is breaking up strong Democrat areas and running those votes up into rural areas to make sure that they've got the advantage in that area. And that's one of the approaches that they've used in places like Illinois and New York and that. So we were just happy with how the vote ended up, or how the districts ended up looking. I think it's going to be a really good map. Doesn't give us the advantage. In fact, when you look at the breakdown, we have a one-seat disadvantage in these maps. But I think if we keep hammering the message of the economy, public safety, education, and we're on the right track with those things. I think we can convince or make the argument to voters that we've got the right path, and I think we're going to be real competitive come this fall.
Going into this session, and even in the early days of the session, it seems like we've been seeing a lot of reports of folks that are retiring. This is going to be their last go-around. Obviously, an election year. You lose some institutional memory, obviously, but you bring some new blood into it. What's your thoughts on some of the faces that will be leaving the legislature and what you see as the bench coming in?
Yeah, so one of them that just announced recently is Senator Rosen. Announced, and she's been in there since, I think it was 2002 that she came in, but just a real strong advocate for rural Minnesota, just an institution herself. She announced that she's leaving. Senator Ingebrigtsen, I imagine a few of you know Senator Ingebrigtsen from down Douglas County area. He's been there for 15, 16 years. So there's a number of those folks. We've seen Senator Cohen, Democrat from the Minneapolis area, left a couple of years ago, but he'd been there for 30-some years. It's hard to see those faces going, because those are people that know the ins and outs of the legislature. They know it's a very traditional body in the sense that there are traditions, there are things that happen in there that make it what it is. And so it's hard to see those folks go and those memories leave, but at the same time, there's new faces, there's new ideas, there's new people coming in. So I think the institution's been around for over 150 years. It'll continue, but it's just the nature of politics, always changing.
Another issue probably isn't mainstream agriculture issue, but workforce. It's hard to find people to work on the farm. It's hard to find people to work in these small businesses, but processing, it doesn't matter. Those workforce issues, do you see any thing to help support filling jobs? That's a big deal, obviously.
I think it is. And for us, when you look at the birth rates of rural Minnesota, we're at a place where we're pretty much just maintaining right now. To me personally, we need some real efforts set on immigration policy. There are people around the world willing and able to come and work that we would love to have. Few farmers get those agricultural work visas, but they are so difficult to get, to bring people in. But we need some real reform on our federal level of bringing people in. We need to figure out how to get people who are willing and able to work, that would be welcome into our communities here. We need to get them in and figure out how to get them either on the manufacturing side or the agricultural side or childcare side. I work in concrete, and boy, we're doing everything we can to try to find people to be there. But we're not the only industry. Everything from law enforcement on. So there needs to be some real change going forward.
I would monopolize you on all the questions. Always think the best questions come from the audience. Any questions you guys have for Senator Anderson?
On that transportation thing, is there anything the state can do to drop? It's a federal issue from what I understand. With the CDL licensing right now, it went into effect in the middle of the month here, where the only way you can get a CDL license right now is you have to go to a school. The cost is between $3,500 and $8,500. We can't get drivers now. I just talked to somebody the other day, the meat haulers that are transport or whatever it is out there. Yeah. They got more private trucks running than they do their own because they got a contract and they can't hire them.
Yeah, on that, I think that is a little bit more of a federal issue. However, it's just one more barrier that they've thrown up in front of our transportation and system right now that you think about all the things that are happening. What a terrible time for that to come into place if that's the case. However, I do hear there are some truckers up north that are out of work, so maybe we can bring them down. And they could help us out a little bit.
Question over here.
Oh, got one there. That is a great question, and that is being litigated presently right now with the Auto Dealers Association. Has put together a lawsuit, and I don't know where that is in the process at this point, but I know that was a big concern for our auto dealers across the state. So they are in the process or have filed a suit regarding that exact same thing, and we were fully supportive of seeing where that ends up in the courts, because to me that's a legislative responsibility. That's not an agency where they're doing it underneath rulemaking, which is taking the legislation that we at the legislature say, okay, we want to do something with transportation, and we give them the power to figure out what the rules are going to be. But this goes beyond rulemaking into a whole policy set that affects every Minnesotan in a way that is going to be a significant driver of our cost for transportation for generations. So yeah, so keep an eye on that, keep tuned. There's going to be some things that will come out of that lawsuit, I imagine.
Question over here. Just repeat the question for the online audience as well.
Sure. So the question then is, what can we do to get money from the cities out to rural Minnesota for our workforce and subsidizing our workforce? And it's kind of funny because when you go to Minneapolis and St. Paul and you hear that, and they say, why are we subsidizing the workforce in rural Minnesota by so much? We should cut them off. So there seems to be a narrative on both sides. One of the things that we do across the state that happened back in the 70s was the LGA, and they'll go back to that and say, well, look at this, we're subsidizing the communities by providing funding for cities and counties across the state through these, I wouldn't say revenue sharing apparatus. So they do have some of that. You know, that's a market-based issue when you talk about what something is worth and if you're getting enough for it or not. And so what, back in the early part of the last century, North Dakotans got together and they put together a state mill because they were feeling the same effects like that. We've got some great co-ops that try to help with some of the issues to give us a little bit stronger hand in marketing and purchasing power here. But that's one of those things. It's a tough nut to crack, but it's a market-based issue that how are we going to find the best leverage that we have, both politically and market-based? And that's why, we argue for making sure that we're in a strong position in the state politically. And I think that we've done that by having a Republican majority in the Senate right now. But yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because I think Representative Keel and I have a bill regarding rural scholarships for folks that want to stay in, go to rural colleges here, but then also stay in rural areas. So that's one of the ways. There's no magic bullet, but that might be it. I'll put that in my notes here. That sounds good.
Any final questions for the senator? Well, with that, Senator, appreciate having the chance to visit with you here today. Again, the Deputy Majority Leader, Mark Johnson, with us here at our Boston Farm Forum. We're going to take a quick break. We're also streaming live on yourliveevent.com, so we're going to, while we bring Representative Keel up, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Good morning once again. Welcome to the KKCQ Farm Forum here in Boston. Again, for our YourLiveEvent.com audience, we've got a great schedule coming up yet as well, including Angie Peltier from University of Minnesota Extension and Ag Commissioner Tom Peterson as well, so stay tuned for that. But right now we get an insight into the House side of things. Representative Deb Keel from District 1B. Deb, appreciate having you here once again this year.
Thank you. I'm very thrilled to be here. I thank Farm Bureau and KKCQ for providing this service, and it's just a wonderful time to be able to come into the eastern part of the district, which stayed the same, but I'm thankful to be here, and thank you very much. And then I will just mention that Representative Steve Green would have been here, but he is worshiping with his family today, saying goodbye to his mother. So I'm amazed that she got through COVID and lived for quite a while afterward, but so keep them in your prayers as they deal with that. So yes, I am in my 6th term. I have to think about that a while. And I serve for the first time in my world. I do not sit on the Ag Committee. I am one of the very few farmers in the legislature. My son and husband would probably tell you that I don't farm as much as I used to. I was in charge of marketing for a while. They're probably happy I'm not there anymore because my son has definitely done better than I have. But and we're even generationally looking at a grandson that's at NDSU now, so I'm excited about that, trying not to push him too soon. But he and I have had conversations about marketing, so I'm thrilled to hear that he's interested, and we'll see where we go with that. It's what a blessing to have your children grow up in the area. So anyway, and then I've been moved to committees such as Health and Human Services. So I serve on the Health Finance Committee, and I serve on the Human Service Finance Committee. They were split out differently this year, and or this term, and it's been quite a foray in understanding not only our healthcare issues and our human services issues, things that need to happen human services-wise with disabilities, nursing home, those kinds of issues. So there is some real conversation about how we need to fix what is there and the challenges that are about, especially. Well, I end up being a conversation about nursing homes quite often, or senior care. And I actually started that world when I was 13 years old because my grandmother, I remember her shockingly was younger than I was when she was widowed, and how she really struggled. And my grandfather had died suddenly, and at 13 I said, "Oh, Grandma, I'll help you." And I had no clue what I was saying. And but I had some real blessings in watching her have dementia. And I say that because I got to know a woman that was in the shadow of my grandfather, who I knew very well. I saw on a daily basis. I grew up on the farm, and Grandpa was there every day, and I really got to know who that lady was. And while it was tragic, and certain things we need to work on in taking care of our elderly or helping us to stay away from those kinds of issues, working toward being a little bit stronger in our mental issues, but just really how that picture works and how devastating it is, not only for our families, but the finances. And I'm leaning toward this way. You're probably wondering what I'm going to, but I saw the effects of farming and how when an elderly person on the farm with all of our land wealth can be devastated by someone being sick and needing help. And so I see that as very important. It's a conversation we're having in the House, and just trying to figure out how we can do that. So I'm very concerned about healthcare and how we have that availability. However, my colleagues want us to just expand Minnesota Care, and unfortunately, I think what they don't understand, and we've not been able to have a in-depth conversation about this, is that our land wealth is so high that we won't still qualify. And yet, I just talked to a farmer the other day that is paying for his family of 4 individually $88,700 deductible per person for his family, and the cost of that was, I don't remember, I'm lacking that number now. Anyway, the cost of that and how they can afford that as well as running the farm. And the other thing I even found with my Republican colleagues is they didn't understand the finances of how our lives go up and down so rapidly and so easy. One year we have great prices, maybe a low production, and the next year we might have high production and low cost, or we might have, what we did this last year, a drought. And what's most important about making sure that we have the availability of health care is that it also affects all of our tax dollars within our own area. Think our schools, our cities, our communities, our townships, the things that we need to do financially to make it successful in rural Minnesota. And I think that's hard for people to understand, the finances and how, it's just a difficult thing for us. So that is part of the conversation. There are a lot of things we talk about. I, too, am, like I said, not in ag, but I did talk to my colleague, John Burkle, who is a turkey grower up in, he's in District 1B, or 1A, the legislator up there, and I asked him, so what are you discussing now? And the differences, I thank Senator Johnson for explaining what's going on. A little disappointed when I heard that the drought relief package in the House is moving along, but unfortunately some of my colleagues want to tie the DNR drought bill with it. Now I have a real problem with that. Drought relief for agriculture is basically private business. It helps our young farmers. It helps financial stability for farmers. But DNR is an agency. And while I wouldn't even argue that we might need some funding in both, I do not want to see them tied together when we get to the floor of the House. And I'm very disappointed that that's the conversation. But that is what they're looking at, and so that is a concern of ours. The other thing is that we look at the Board of Animal Health, some good things that are happening. There is discussion about doing some more diagnostic money for the new lab equipment for the diagnostic lab. Why is that important? Well, if you've heard the news, we are talking about possibly getting another go-through of avian influenza. Remember, we are the largest turkey grower in Minnesota is the largest turkey producer. And so that's important. And then also something near and dear to my heart, my brothers are swine producers, or my brother that's on the farm. I have 4 brothers that have been there at some point, but one is there with my nephews. And African swine fever is always on their heightened schedule. I grew up, even my grandchildren, when they were first young, we would go and see the little piggies and walk through the barns. That's no longer the case. My nephew would have a heart attack if I even opened the door. And I don't blame him. I don't blame him. There's a lot of work, and my brothers as young boys on an FFA project actually lost an entire barn of bred sows to methane poisoning. And I remember the devastation, the challenges, and of course, Father was very active and helped them get through that loss. But it was challenging, and so it's really important. It's just really a concern about agriculture and our animals. And one thing I don't want to be tested on this, but I do know that cows and pigs and turkeys and all of those animals, I always say that there is everything used in animal agriculture except for the squeal or the moo. So I think that's something that our friends and neighbors don't always understand. And that's really important to understand. There's a lot of products that come out of agriculture, and we can talk about soybeans and wheat and all kinds of things that we do. Even sugar beets has side products. And anyway, and the other thing that I have not talked to my colleague Paul Anderson, but I understand that he's working on some license and bonding requests and making sure that farmers are not caught up in this loss of selling their product, not getting covered when someone's doing something a little more than illegal and creating problems. And it is quite the lesson. However, it is devastating. And I can tell you that I have an $8,000 education because I was marketing and I was working with a company, and these gentlemen actually ended up serving prison time. But they decided to change my position, and $8,000 later, I wasn't able to recover that. We did a lawsuit trying to recover it, and the reality was these gentlemen were going to prison, and I could stand in line to get the $8,000. So that is what I always refer to as my $8,000 farm education, and I'm hoping my grandfather can get it for your grandson can get it for cheaper, but we'll see. So. Anyway, so those are some of the things going on in agriculture. I heard the conversation about employment and what can we do. I sit as a lead, Republican lead, on industrial education. We are in industrial education. We are also talking about broadband and how we can make sure that people have broadband. You know, we've learned that telehealth is important in rural areas. I've talked to some of my growers that are having lack of communication, and they've got maybe a pacemaker or something that needs to be transmitted, and they're having trouble getting appropriate broadband. So not just the access of broadband, but something a little faster. And I think back at dial-up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, how did we survive all that? But I'm a little spoiled too, because I'm part of Garden Valley and am very pleased with the Garden Valley company and how they have been on top of broadband. So, but in industrial education, we've talked about broadband and trying to make sure we're dispersing those funds. But also we have a great conversation about how we want to make sure that industrial education is connected to the needs of our high school students. And so there's some processes going on. You know, I come from the era of having career and tech classes. And you, as a junior or senior, you could have quite a few of those classes. In fact, I see now in Crookston, we actually have a physician's assistant who, she actually took healthcare classes in high school. And I see that in a few other places. I've gotten to know people that are involved in that. But more importantly, diesel mechanics, we might think they're going away. It's going to be a long time before we talk about not needing diesel mechanics. And we are in desperate need. Good luck finding one, and that's really important. I think as we probably don't replace equipment as readily with new, and are redoing our equipment. So understanding the mechanics of that, and of course the electronics that have to happen, or the internet with our equipment, and the impressiveness of being able to record so many things by having this broadband, and the knowledge of running our tractors the way they are run now. You know, whether it's electronics or the mechanics or the engine, it's really important. So we've talked about that, funding some more education dollars, connecting our state schools. I think Northland Community College in our area, Alexandria has a school. I can go, Bemidji does, Wadena does, and they all have different specialities, but they are trying to expand. I know Northland is talking about what they can do about the trucking issue, making sure that our truckers have what they need while we're getting through the, hopefully, federal changes again. But I even talked to the chancellor there, and she told me that they're trying to work it out so that people can actually work trucking while getting the updates they need to be able to follow the federal guidelines, and hopefully our federal congressional people are looking at this and understanding what it is doing to our rural area. And having CDL license is, while it's important that we make sure we have that ability to drive a truck and understand the importance of managing it, that we also are very adept at doing that. My husband, Lon, we have semis now, and our son is, of course, advantaged to all that. And we had a truck one day, and he said, "You got to get in this truck," because I've just driven the smaller trucks. "Oh, no, I'm not doing that." He said, no, I want you to get in the truck and drive it. So I did. And I said, this isn't all that big a deal, other than making sure that you don't drive it too fast. And, of course, no one pulls in front of you. The Department of MnDOT and I have had conversations quite often about when we have trucks on the road, that car drivers understand that when you pull in front of a loaded truck, you are making that truck driver do really serious things in a quick hurry. And I don't think our drivers always understand. I know I didn't as a kid. I brought a grain truck in, one of our older trucks, small. My father said to me I had to drive it a half a mile into the yard. He said, "Now, Deb, don't drive it too fast." He knew I had a lead foot. And he said, "You be careful, because you can tip this truck." Well, it didn't scare a 16-year-old very much, so I drove it into the yard. And as it would happen, I was driving too fast. Well, you have to make a sharp corner to get into my yard. Well, guess what? There was grain laying on the ground. The other reason why I don't drive the truck too fast, you don't want to lose your product. And he comes to supper that night, and he says, "Well, I see you didn't quite hear what I said." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, there's grain on the ground." "Oh, well." And I learned a lesson. But more importantly, we don't want people to learn that lesson by having an accident or flipping a truck and being killed. And I can tell you other stories about how I learned to be careful about pushing trucks and all those kinds of things. But the importance in that is the education. However, I think the greatest education is getting out and driving that truck, driving that tractor, understanding how it works, and the dangers that are involved, as well as the power that you have when you're driving those. So really important, and I really appreciate the direction of industrial education. I know that Zavrel's over in East Grand Forks is working with the East Grand Forks High School on a training for students that are learning how to drive large equipment, so that we have people that can help fix roads. We obviously, driving over here, need to keep working on Highway 2. It has a lot of needs. And we want to see that replaced and repaired so that we can haul in our product as well. But we need to make sure that they're educated. And I think we have a lot of high school students that wouldn't mind getting in one of those big vehicles. And, I had the privilege of sitting in one of our MnDOT trucks. Oh, my gosh, when there's snowplow out there, you'd think of a truck. But there's a whole electronic bank of items that have to be managed when they are snow plowing. I'm just impressed with how they run through all that. They're programming it, they're watching it. There's a lot going on, whether it's the county and those are great educational things, and an opportunity for students to maybe taste something before actually getting into that career or moving on. And so those are things that we're working with. I'm really pleased with my chair in the industrial education, Representative Jean Pulowski, who is an educator down in the Winona area. Very reasonable, very works with us very well, and really understands what rural Minnesota needs. So I appreciate that vision, and it's hard for sometimes our metro colleagues to understand what it is they're requesting. And that's important, whether it's healthcare or industrial education, and they need that too. They need those educators too, and we need to make sure that we are educating our students in the Minneapolis area. And I just really, and then I was going to say, the balance of funding, when we talk about funding in rural, I see that all the time, and I think we really need to, the governor talked about this, being one Minnesota. But we keep separating rural and Minnesota. And I think we really need to teach our colleagues in the cities, as well as we learn, Senator Johnson and I learn about the issues in the cities. I mean, there's 80 plus acres southeast of the cities that is run by a Hmong community that has huge vegetable gardens. It's quite impressive to see all they do. And of course, they do that and sell it in the summer in markets, and it's part of their income. And an opportunity. It's really fun to see how they're doing all of that and packaging it. And but the fact that as hard as they work, they can't feed everybody in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's not possible. And we are able to feed not just Minnesota, but the world. And we have that opportunity. And there's a lot of wonderful things coming. Senator Johnson talked about some of the things. And I would say, too, when you talked about our upcoming discussion of soybean crushing plants and all of the opportunity, it's really important. My brothers with swine have to drive down to southern Minnesota to get a truckload of meal. And it's really, that's a long drive. And Minnesota, and Polk County, where we sit right now, is the largest soybean grower in Minnesota. And we won't have enough soybeans. So there is a huge need for all of that. So I will stop talking. Thank you very much. And any questions?
Well, your warm-up questions, let me get one to you, Representative Keel. I just look at COVID. It's been such a game changer, and in ag, we're kind of isolated sometimes itself, and some of those, you talk about being on the Health and Human Services committees. Are resources do you see available for the mental health, some of those kind of things that we need, and in particular, I think some of our youth, that it's certainly been an issue there as well.
Yes, yeah, and that is a conversation, making sure that we provide enough funding for mental health. It's really tragic to hear some of the stories about children that are isolated. And the one thing that I think is really, really important is our rural schools brought their kids back, because our students being isolated at home was not healthy, even if they had the support system that some have, but not all. Not all. We have students that are much better off in schools, where there is support systems to help them, whether it's a health problem or a mental health issue that they need to talk to somebody about. It helps them with stability. And yeah, there is a lot of conversation, and I know that is a direction of funding and just opportunity in general. We're looking at what we need to be able to do. But I find it challenging, even our public health conversations, is we're having a hard time getting Minneapolis-St. Paul to understand we too need all of those availabilities, and just finding qualified people to be available in the schools, in public health in general. I like the fact that when I was a school board member in Crookston, we were able to connect with Northwest Mental Health Center and actually had somebody in the building. And at first the kids were, teacher, I have to go see the counselor, or whatever. And finally, I talked to one of the leaders in the school district, and they said, well, we've learned that we tell the students, well, you can't walk out of class. However, we'll set you up an appointment and you can go talk. And so we're, being able to help students in a direction that needs to be done. Now, Northwest Mental Health Center changed a little bit in our area and has had some issues are changing how we fund that and where it's coming from. So there is going to be, I see Joan Lee shaking her head because she knows from the county level, and there is some real challenges there that we have discussed and will have to fund in different areas. I'm hearing from lobbyists right now, but those are conversations that we will have.
Just kind of mechanics of the legislature, you guys are still in doing remote hearings and such, right?
Yes, we should talk about that. The House is still doing Zoom. So all of the committees, whether you're in the Capitol or at home, it's all online. And it's fine in that we're keeping everybody talking, but I feel like Senator Johnson said, this is not relationship building. I'm having a heck of a time trying to work with my colleagues, just back and forth, the contacts, the conversation. And I am really thrilled to hear that the mask mandates came off the floor as of Thursday. And so the legislature the Capitol is open. So if you came down to visit us at the Capitol, we're meeting usually Mondays at 3:30 and Thursdays at 3:30 on the floor of the House. Pretty short meetings right now. In fact, I think we were there for about 10 minutes on Thursday. And what we call it is paper pushing. Just so you know this, it is a bill going from one committee to the next and has to go through the floor of the House. And so that's a lot of what our paper pushing is right now, and we're hearing those bills. I'm disappointed. The Senate has passed the unemployment issue, the insurance that needs to be done. We have not done that, and unfortunately, my colleagues want to add to that. And let's just do that bill, get it done. We'll discuss the other issues later, but this was a deadline of, Senator Johnson, was it the 15th that we were supposed to have this done for our businesses? So now we're behind, and they have to pay in. And that's a killer for whether you're large or small. It's going to be a problem. So anyway, and then our committees, I don't know, we are going to be back in, the Capitol State Office building is going to be open Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays come March 21st. However, I have not been told if we're going to go away from Zoom meetings. It occurred to me that I'm like, yay, we're back. Oh, wait a minute. They didn't tell us if we could get together. So staff is coming back, and I really, in defense of the House, part of the problem is we don't have enough employees to run all of that. And so because we didn't start that way on January 31st, we need to have some people that help with different details of running the committees and all of that stuff. So I think a lot of our staff is actually doing two things at once. And just managing a Zoom site is in and of itself a problem. Or it takes attention from someone. So those things, I'm guessing, are why we're lacking not doing it earlier. And I'm really hoping that we'll be back doing that, because, like I said, the relationship building is really difficult. I don't know a lot of my colleagues across the aisle. I've even had a hard time getting to know even the Republicans, and yet we can talk to each other because we're not meeting all the time. We do meet in caucus now together, so more and more of that is happening, and it's really important so that we can work across the aisle, work together on what needs to happen in Minnesota.
Good deal. Questions? Yes.
I wanted to stand up and say, hey, ladies, we call that the kill zone. They do not know. They have no clue. So we should make it mandatory to have some kind of agriculture training course, introductory to agriculture or something, and especially in urban schools. Rural schools don't need them. We get that naturally. Yeah. The urban schools need them. We don't understand how far separate we are from urban people anymore.
Yeah.
I would say that just that comment, I'll add to that. Actually, we're working on that. Now it's rural schools, but for a while we had no ag education teachers, and unfortunately, I'm really pleased that after some major conversation with the president of the University of Minnesota, they removed ag education from Crookston school districts, and Dr. Lyle Westrom called me and he said, hey, Deb, we got to get this back. I nagged every event that the university president was at. He saw me. I'm sure he said, oh no, here she comes with that same message. But we got it back. What also we are seeing is we've got rural education teachers in our school districts. Fisher, Minnesota, Kristen, who was the MREA Teacher of the Year, Ag teacher, and she's started as a nurse. She's a farmer's daughter, started as a nurse and went to ag education, and she's just a delight. I just love watching her and her family and how they're successful. However, she had a simulator course for kids to be able to use, see how driving a truck was. And I do know that our ag education teachers are in some Minneapolis schools, and we're seeing some of those kids. University of Minnesota Crookston sees them because they come from the cities and they're taking ag classes. So I see it coming. It's slow, but it's coming, and I'm seeing a lot of rural education teachers back in our school districts. We don't have enough, but we're going to lose one in Crookston. She's decided to go on her own and do her own business, but the opening and the ability of all the things that the students can do and understand, and we're seeing a lot of city children want to know how to grow, how to raise animals, get involved in natural resources and be educated in those terms. So it is slow, but it's coming.
Question here.
One of the things that you've been a leader on that I've appreciated is the area of CTE, especially on the Industrial Education Committee. CTE affects us here at the school. I teach band and choir here at the high school library right now. And I've appreciated having people come in who know what that life is like because they've got real life experience. We want to keep making sure that people from the field can come and teach. Can you talk about some of those bridges that you're creating with your colleagues, especially on that committee? There's a lot of metro folks there who don't even know where this place is, let alone how to work with people who are out here. It's an important thing for me as an employee to have people who are qualified and know what it's like in ag and know what it's like in auto mechanics, wood shop, whatever, to serve alongside me. Can you talk about how that conversation is going and what more we can do to keep people in school training the future workforce that we desperately need?
Question about the importance of career education, right? The technical schools.
Exactly. We just talked about that this week in committee. They're doing they're doing a pilot project, which to me, I'd rather just put money into let's do it everywhere, because I know it will work. And so does Representative Pulowski. But sometimes you got to get your foot in the door to get something going. First of all, I will say thank you very much for being a band and choir director or instructor. There is way more in our education to music than people would think. It's not just a fun class. Yeah, and for a musician, it was. I mean, it was just I loved going to those classes. But it's more important that students are learning all kinds of things, how to work together. You can't have a choir if everyone's a soloist. That's just not how it works. Same goes with band. And those kids need to learn to work together. And so it is an important part of our education. And the other thing is that it is important that we have these CTE classes. So we are trying to bring that back. It is really important. It is costly. When we had it in the 70s, federal government gave us quite a bit of money for those programs. And we had a lot of different CTE, career and technical education programs. But bringing them back is going to be a challenge. Yet I think in the committee we have talked about being able to give somebody, let's say you're ready to retire as a farmer, but want something to do. Family's taken over. I'm not done farming, but I'd like to do something. And so you might have a degree, you might not, and we're looking at ways for you to be able to take your knowledge and give you credit for that knowledge, and then be able to work in a classroom that you might just work at for 6 weeks, or maybe you say you'd like to do it longer. We have a young man in Crookston. I watched him grow up. It cracks me up when I see him. He was a teacher's nightmare, to be perfectly honest. He was in construction trades, But he came back to want to be involved in the school, and he is now a construction trades teacher. Does he know everything? No. He's been handed some things he has to learn. But in that time frame, he has been educated. He's got his teaching degree now. He had a construction degree, but he now has a teaching degree. He is very dedicated, and it's really fun to see the contribution to the community as well as they build things that the city or the school district needs. But teaching kids to weld and construction trades and an offering of more in life, boys and girls. I came from the world where girls were kind of eking into that world, but it is really successful, and so we need to show our students that, because they might still go to four-year college, but they might be looking at a stage degree rather than just going out and getting your 4-year and finding you didn't want to be where you were at. And I often want to ask Kristen Swartz, when she ended up in education, did you ever think when you went into nursing that you were going to head this direction? And she's just embraced every part of her life that is in front of her. So the reality is that our teachers come from different walks of life, and so if you're thinking about doing such change, don't say I'm too old for anything, because expertise is always appreciated, and we're trying to acknowledge that background and the job, the knowledge that we have, and I think that's important.
Good deal. Well, Representative Keel, we certainly appreciate having the chance to connect with you here at Boston. Yes. And with that, we're going to take a quick break. We've got plenty more to come. Again, for our online audience, your live event, we'll be back in just a moment. Good morning once again as we come to you from the KKCQ Farm Forum here in Foston. Always some great information, and we're going to get some agronomic information as we get geared up for the 2022 growing season. University of Minnesota Extension educator Angie Peltier is our guest. And Angie, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you all for coming out here today. It's sure nice to see some familiar faces and to be out and among members of the public again. So this is our busy winter meeting season, and I just wanted to let anybody know that needs to get their private pesticide applicator license renewed. If you need to get recertified and planned on doing that next week in Crookston on Friday, do know that the Youngquist Auditorium had a leak in the ceiling from a steam pipe, and part of the ceiling fell down, and so now they're very worried about a potential asbestos issue in there. And so we've had to move from that Youngquist Auditorium. We're still going to be on the UMC campus, but now 1 to 4:30 is the program. You can register same day. It'll be in Bede Ballroom, though, which is the second floor of the Student Center on campus. So we still love to have you, but if you happen to know of anybody that planned on coming to that Crookston event, you might let them know about the unexpected and unfortunate venue change. So I came to talk to you today about a problem that we typically see not every year, but we definitely saw quite a bit of two-spotted spider mite infestations last year. So as you probably know, Crookston and up to Red Lake Falls, and then over and towards East Grand Forks, that was that area where we really had the exceptional drought. But anywhere where the drought hit, we tended to have spider mite infestations, and I'm going to share some of that work with you here today. Two-spotted spider mites are an important pest, and it is an important pest worldwide. So it affects around 150 different plant species that are of economic importance. So these include our agronomic crops, all of them around our area, greenhouse, horticultural, and ornamental crops as well. Two-spotted spider mites tend to be pretty small. They're about half the size of a soybean aphid. Those little blue arrows you might see on the screen there, those are pointing to the eggs. They're perfectly round. Spider mites can produce a lot of these eggs. The spider mites themselves tend to be a dull orange color. If you have bifocals, I know personally I have bifocals, I find them hard to see, even with the bifocals. So if you're going out to scout, I suggest you bring along a magnifying glass or use your phone to really zoom in and see whether or not you have an infestation. But you might notice from that picture up there, those red arrows are pointing to the spider mites themselves. They do have what look to be darker spots on the middle of their body. They'll cause some injury symptoms that I'll share a little bit more in just a bit. But one of the injury symptoms is called stippling. So in that blue circle there, that's really showing what stippling looks like up close. Individual cells will have been fed upon, and then they're no longer nice and green. And I'll talk a little bit why that is in just a little bit. One thing about spider mites, they're mites, they're not insects. So they will have 8 legs. They're arachnids like spiders. So like spiders, they produce webbing. So as they're walking on our soybean leaves in this instance, they're leaving that webbing behind them. That's important for them and their survival. the survival of their young. So the eggs are covered by that webbing, and it protects those eggs from drying out. You know, just low humidity. It keeps the humidity close to the leaf. It protects them from rain, from getting bounced off the plant with rain, and from drying out from the wind. There's also some thought that it can protect the eggs from pesticides as well. One really interesting thing about spider mites is that they use this webbing actually for dispersal. Because they're arachnids, they don't have wings, so they move by crawling or by practice called ballooning, where they use these long webs just kind of as streamers to catch a ride on currents. So they can travel up to 2 miles this way. So their growth and development, like any other cold-blooded animal, it's going to be really driven by temperature. And so as our temperatures increase, this speeds up how quickly they'll run through their life cycle. So eggs will tend to hatch up to about 86 degrees. It's been found that they can hatch in about 5 days after they were initially laid. And from hatching as an egg, they go through several molts. About 6.5 days later, at very high temperatures, they can basically become an adult. Now, female mites, they can begin, as soon as they've turned into adults, they can begin to lay eggs, and they will lay eggs for about a month's time, and that the number of eggs can range anywhere from 100 to 300 eggs, and so that's a lot for one animal, a lot of reproductive potential there. One thing that's kind of interesting, we see this with obviously soybean aphids as well, and several other insect pests, is females don't need males to produce viable offspring. And above and beyond just being kind of a weird quirk of nature, the reason why we should really pay attention to this aspect is because it has some implications for pesticide resistance. So unfertilized eggs will have one set of genes. They'll tend to be male. And what that means is if there is a mutation in a gene that makes it so that that male is able to better survive a pesticide application, that individual will be able to survive to reproduce. Whereas if an egg is fertilized, it can become either a male or a female mite. It will have two sets of genes, and so if there's a mutation in one of those sets of genes, that other complementary gene might be able to mask that, and so maybe they would still be susceptible to our pesticide. And so that has some implications as far as resistance is concerned. As you probably figured, drought tends to trigger spider mite infestations. They're always around. So spider mites tend to survive in our perennial vegetation along the outside edges of our fields, so in our grass waterways, in our drainage ditches, in alfalfa or other perennial fields with perennial plants in them. But when we have drought conditions, that really degrades that quality of the food that they're eating. And so over time, as they deplete that quality themselves through their feeding, they're basically stimulated to move away from what's becoming a diminished food supply, and then they move into our soybeans in this instance. Our soybean quality, as far as the mite is concerned, increases, and One thing that we don't often think about is the nice job that that some of our natural biocontrol organisms do on our behalf. So in a typical year where we have rain and we don't have drought conditions, especially if we have cooler temperatures, that tends to favor fungal growth. Well, some fungi are able to actually colonize insect pests and arachnid pests like mites. And so those fungi that help to keep down our mite populations aren't active during drought years, and so we don't have that free biocontrol that they usually provide for us. And then also, like I was saying, drought, it's typically, obviously, lack of rain, but it's also oftentimes high temperatures, and that will speed up the life cycle of mites as well. So this past year and for many years, since 2015, the Minnesota Soybean Research and Promotion Council has sponsored a survey of the western part of the state. So this is an IPM survey. We have a couple of crop scouts that go out and visit randomly soybean fields, and they're looking for all kinds of insects and diseases. One of the things that they'll do is they'll stop on the edge of the field and they'll look for spider mites. They'll also go into the field as well and look for spider mites. And so what you're seeing here are two maps. On the left-hand side, that's the edge of field map, and on the right-hand side, that's within the field. Each of those black dots for this time period, so here we have July 19th through the 30th, each of those black dots was a location where a scout actually visited but did not find spider mites. The red triangles are fields where they did find spider mites. So you'll see that this particular week, it was about a month after we first saw spider mites in fields in Minnesota. Typically, we'll start to have infestations happen on the edge of the field as those mites move in from that perennial vegetation, and then there'll be a slight lag before they'll move within the field. So here's a week later, and you can see that there's many more fields that have been positive for spider mites, and even more the following week. And so we had a real significant infestation this past year. So what spider mites do is they have these piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they use those to penetrate the cells, and then they suck out the contents of cells. And what they're really after is the chloroplast. That's the part of individual plant cells that has chlorophyll. And chlorophyll, if you remember from your science class, really is important for photosynthesis. And that's really what the factory that's in our plants that makes those plants grow, develop, and eventually produce yield. So when they feed on the plants, here's another close-up of stippling. Cells are broken open and they no longer have that green material in them. In 1 minute time, a single spider mite can damage between 20 and 100 cells. And in 1 hour, they can consume about half of their body weight. So here's what it can sometimes look like from even the road at highway speed. You might have noticed this past year that a lot of fields would tend to have kind of a dull color to them. That's especially on the edge of the field, that's a really good indication that if you haven't been scouting regularly, might be time to go and take a look and see what's going on. Like I said, you have loss of chlorophyll. That means you have less photosynthesis. The plant, when it reaches a certain point, it figures, you know what, I'm not getting enough sugars coming back out of this particular leaf. I'm going to drop this leaf. And so the plant begins shedding leaves from the bottom of the plant and progressing up towards the top of the canopy. Eventually, this can actually, in severe instances, lead to plant death. When you have really high infestations, the leaves will turn yellow, bronze, and then eventually drop. I'll show you some pictures where that I took this past year, and there were some pretty severe infestations. Eventually, you can end up with 40 to 60% yield loss, but this really depends on when during the growing season our spider mites started feeding, when their populations really started to increase. It can also lead to pod shattering. So even if the crop was able to produce a crop to beans to harvest, sometimes you can lose those beans to shattering. You can also end up with some shriveled seeds as well. And that yield concern exists up until pods have completely filled out. So here's a picture I took. This was right outside of Red Lake Falls, actually, August 5th. And what you might notice is that you can't really see this dull or even yellow coloration that I was talking about that usually starts towards the edge of the field. So this is the field edge down toward the lower left-hand corner. But stress in our soybean plants can kind of exacerbate feeding injury caused by spider mites. And so what you're seeing here towards the middle of the field, that discolored area, is soybeans that have been really stressed because that's where water tends to sit in this particular field, and that weight of the water has really compacted the soil there. And so the plants are already stressed out. And so spider mite feeding injury has just really progressed very quickly in that part of the field. So if you wanted to take a look and see what happened close up, I walked out towards that area of the field and took some pictures down low. You might notice there are none of the lower leaves still attached to these plants, and no pods, no flowers, no pods. And so this, I think this picture just illustrates how just how severe yield loss can be. I know that some people, when they were determining whether or not to treat for spider mites this past year, we're really making a call about whether there was enough yield potential left to protect. And so I know some people did decide to go ahead and treat. Other people made an opposite calculation. So I was talking about scouting. Obviously, we would always recommend that people scout their fields. But if you work with an agronomist, most likely they're doing the scouting for you. So start at the field edge. If you notice some of that dull discoloration, that's a really good indication you should probably go and check out what's happening in your field. We would recommend that you pull up the plant and take a look at that plant from the bottom of the plant and up. Basically looking at the lower, middle, and then upper part of the canopy for spider mites. Turn those leaves over, look at the bottom edge of that leaf, look for that webbing. You might be able to, with a magnifying glass, you might be able to see the spider mites themselves. If you can't see the spider mites themselves, sometimes what you can do is take a white piece of paper and put it down underneath the soybean plants and then shake them. And then you might be able to see those little kind of dull orange dots essentially moving around on the paper. And then you know you have an infestation. If you do find them on the field edge, walk inside the field and take a look as you walk into the field, stopping every now and again. Take a look at two plants again throughout the entire plant length there, and do that again every 4 to 5 days. what I handed out to you, or what Don handed to you, was a handout that really shows on one side a rating scale that was developed by a couple of colleagues from University of Minnesota Extension. And this is based both on the presence of mites and then the extent of that injury that the mites cause, and the part of the plant that has been infested and is showing symptoms. You might notice that a score of 3, that is when you will have reached the spray threshold. And that's where you have heavy stipplings, some lower leaf loss, definitely lower leaf yellowing, spider mites moving into that middle canopy, and some individual colonies in the upper canopy as well. Now you might notice that this spray threshold comes before economic loss. So that's by design. The goal here is to, for folks to understand, okay, my spider mite infestation has reached the threshold. I now have 5 to 7 days to arrange an application, whether you do it yourself or you hire somebody. You can't just turn on a dime. And so this gives you a little bit of time to arrange an application before economic losses have occurred. And so that's where you would see lower leaf yellowing very apparent. Quite a few lower leaves have dropped. You'll see that stippling that I was talking about, and mites, they're very common in that upper canopy. And then you even can start to see mites and stippling pretty apparent in the upper canopy as well. So it's at that point where you're going to start to see some economic losses. Chemical control. So just in general, what you're going to want to do if you do reach that spray threshold is have adequate carrier volume. You want to have plenty of coverage of the plant, and so for a ground-based spray rig, 20 gallons per acre is recommended. I know that's not fun for anybody hauling around that much water, but it's really going to provide the best coverage. And then from the air, 5 gallons per acre. It's really also recommended that even though you might only notice those mites along the field edges, it's very likely that a significant population will have already moved into the middle part of the field. And so it's not recommended to just spot spray, because you're just gonna have to go back out again pretty quickly and spray the rest of the field. After a spray, make sure you go out and see how well it works. Like I said, we do have resistance issues, and so we're going to want to make sure that you are able to get a good control. And if you weren't, if you're unsatisfied with the level of control you got, make sure you alternate the mode of action of the product that you use. So on the other side of the page for your handout, there's at the bottom of the first page with the infestation scale, and then the whole rest of the other page, that contains all of the different modes of action that we have labeled for two-spotted spider mite control. So you might notice that there's a big red X there on the slide. That's because we no longer have chlorpyrifos. It's no longer registered for use in any of our field crops. And so we don't have that, but I believe there are 7 others. When I counted before, there's 7 other active ingredient families, and then there's mixtures as well. So we do have some options of both insecticides and miticides. You can see on that sheet, we also have the part of their life cycle that's actually managed by the product, and then we also have whether or not they're also labeled for soybean aphid management, and then whether or not there have been resistance concerns in the past. Actually, let me go back. So you can see after that first line, after the X, we have insecticide group 3A. That's pyrethroid. There's one common name of the active ingredient listed. So bifenthrin. So this is one active ingredient in the pyrethroid class. You can see there's several trade names here. What you aren't seeing is lambda cyhalothrin. That's Warrior. A caution, don't use that to manage spider mites because you're just gonna flare up those spider mite populations. So it's gonna basically do the opposite of what you want it to do. And so just one note of caution there. Here's another note of caution. What's been found through research is that the neonicotinoid seed treatments have been shown to actually increase our spider mite infestations. And so obviously you have, if you have a neonics seed treatments on your soybean seed, you have it there for a reason, but at least you know this, and so you might want to consider scouting a little bit earlier than you might have initially. So what happens is a couple of these active ingredients, they actively suppress genes in the plant defense pathways. And so what we've seen is that it can actually increase two-spotted spider mite populations by about 50% over untreated seed. So I mentioned resistance earlier. So there's a list here of the top 5 resistant arthropods. Two-spotted spider mites is at the top of the list. There are 92 active ingredients that it's been found to be, that there are particular populations that are resistant to, several cases as well. And you might wonder, well, how does an infrequent pest become resistant? Well, they're always around. They're, like I said, they're always are in that perennial, those perennial plants along the outside edges of our field. So when we manage other pests in our fields, some of these spider mites will be exposed as well, and oftentimes to less than lethal concentrations because you're not directly applying the pesticide to those perennial crops. Also, and this is Bob Cook's wording here, repeated mismanagement of soybean aphids. So in this case, prophylactic treatments, so treatments where you haven't reached the treatment threshold, is just adding pressure to our spider mite populations. And eventually what we're gonna do is select out those individuals that are better able to survive a particular pesticide, and that over time, those individuals become much more frequent in the population than those that are not able to survive those applications. And so what we would suggest from an insecticide resistance management perspective, particularly because we already lost one of our active ingredients from our toolbox, is to monitor for resistance. So when you go and reach a spray threshold and apply a treatment, if you've noticed that, well, I had plenty of carrier volume, I used the correct nozzles, I followed the label to the T, and you go back in 5 days and it didn't seem to cut it at all, please let Extension know. We really want to know what's happening, just so that we can help you best manage spider mites this year and then into the future. But it's basically, if we treat only when we reach our economic thresholds, we'll save money and we'll reduce the number of times that those individuals are exposed to our particular pesticide. Just some last minute management recommendations. Again, scout and use that treatment threshold. Treat that entire field. Rescout in 5 days, for example, and then see whether or not it's been effective. You might notice on your handout too that there are different parts of the life cycle that are targeted by particular pesticide active ingredients. So if the pesticide doesn't take care of the eggs, those eggs will soon hatch after your application, and so it's important that you go back out and just make sure that you've taken care of everything as well as you could. If you need to retreat, go ahead and use an alternate mode of action. So, questions? Yes.
I'm going to throw the first one. Okay. Yeah.
What's, something different when I see you said scout alfalfa, what's the difference between these and the alfalfa weevil?
So alfalfa weevils are insects that obviously parasitize alfalfa, and then the two-spotted spider mites are considerably smaller, and they're arachnids, and they might start out in alfalfa, but they're going to move into our soybean. So two different lifestyles. We did have quite a bit of the alfalfa weevil statewide this past year. I know. Yeah, it's been pretty bad. I do know that a colleague of mine, if you are interested in some extension publications about that, I'd be glad to give you my card and I can send that to you. Yeah.
Angie, what's the economic threshold for treatment on spider mites?
Sure. So the economic threshold is based both on the presence of spider mites, where they are in the canopy, and then it's also based on the amount of injury. So our spray threshold is, it's basically when we have that heavy stippling in the lower canopy, our lower leaves are starting to yellow. We might have even lost some of those lower leaves. We're starting to see some of the stippling and plenty of spider mites in the middle part of the canopy. And we're starting to see a little bit of spider mites moving into that upper canopy. So when we will receive some yield losses is when we have a lot of stippling in that upper canopy, and we might even see some yellowing of the middle canopy leaves, but it'll be evident that we'll have a significant population in that upper canopy as well. So the goal is to treat before we reach that economic loss.
Good deal. Any other questions? Right here. How do they overwinter?
Sure. So a lot of our, when we've gotten a lot of these recent days when it's been so cold and windy, for a lot of our insect pests, if they're below the snow line, that's not going to help us at all, unfortunately. Our soybean aphids, we haven't seen those a whole lot in the last couple of years, but those, they lay their eggs up on buckthorn plants at the bud scales, will tend to be above ground. And so those eggs for soybean aphids will tend to be exposed to the drying, cold winds, and then those very low temperatures, negative 25 to 30, can reduce their survival. Unfortunately, when it comes to two-spotted spider mites, they're going to be in that perennial vegetation along the outside edges of our soybean fields, for example, and those are pretty well covered with snow right now, unfortunately. Nice insulating layer, and so they're just happy as clams down there, just waiting for another drought. Oh, interesting question. He asked whether it would help to burn the perimeter of the field. Huh. I'm not sure that that's been looked at before. I don't know the answer to that. You would think so, but I don't know.
Got some new research to work on. Good deal.
Good
Angie,
question.
Appreciate the chance to connect with you here.
Yeah.
Angie Peltier with us, University of Minnesota Extension. Please show your appreciation. We'll take a quick break and be back with Ag Commissioner Tom Peterson. Good morning once again here at the KKCQ Farm Forum here in Boston. Always a tremendous program. Again, thanks to the folks watching online on yourliveevent.com as well. Again, I'm Don Wick from the Red River Farm Network. Great to have with us Ag Commissioner Tom Peterson. Of course, you put a lot of miles. I've been watching you all over on social media. You're crisscrossing the state, and of course, now in the legislature, you're busy watching that as well. But I'll let you bring us up to speed on some of the things you're working on.
Okay, well, thanks, Don, and it's great to be up here. I feel like I've been up this way a lot this last year. I try to find different ways. I live in Pine City, about an hour south of Duluth, way over on the eastern side of the state, and just with the weather and everything else going on this year, made several trips, and I'm always trying to decide what's the best way to get here. And this morning, I was going to come last night, because it's about a 4-hour drive, and man, I just looking at the weather and the wind and the snow you guys have up here, I'm glad I got up this morning and drove up this way and then try to work my way back. But, you know, with the drought this summer, really spent a lot of time. And a couple of times I was up here with the governor and other times, and it was just really hard to see, you know, and I stopped at the Bagley sale barn in July, and, you know, as the drought started to hit, I started to hear from farmers. I had a farmer call me from the Staples sale barn, and he was really concerned about the sell-off of cattle that he was seeing that day, and that was early July, and we had already started to see farmers really short on hay. And then I came up, I stopped at the Bagley sale barn, and man, I could not believe the cattle they had there. That was probably August. Mid-August, I came up. Some of you know Richard Moen. He lives over near Clearbrook, and I remember driving down Highway 2, and I turned north to go near Leonard, and I had to stop my car when I looked at those pastures and saw the dust, and it looked like I was in Arizona. But Richard took me around to a lot of farms and really got that firsthand look. Even on his own farm, he had to sell off all his sheep, and so that was a big piece, and that's something we're really looking at here. And I should just quick introduce myself. Tom Peterson, the commissioner. I've served now for 3 years, and before that I worked for almost 17 years as a lobbyist for Farmers Union. I do have a farm. My family's always been in the horse business. We've had cattle and other things along with it. I still dabble in horses. I always say, Don, that being a horse trader, it trains you well for politics. So I enjoy, working with just for the betterment of farmers, and try to, do what I can. And so in the legislature, our big thing that we put forward, we've actually had it out there since about October, is a drought package that would do $5 million in grants to mostly to livestock farmers. Crop farmers do have crop insurance, doesn't make them whole by far, but cattle farmers just don't have that kind of safety net that crop farmers do. And we know we're short on hay, we know we're short on feed. I get a report every month about dairy farms, and it's the hardest thing I open. Every month we're losing 20 dairy farms. We're down to about 2,000 dairy farms, but we've been losing 20 dairy farms a month for the last 6 months, and I thought we were down to kind of where we'd start leveling off. But I know more farmers that have had to schedule auctions up in this area because they're just out of feed, and the thing about the drought was, we first cutting about half, second cutting, third cutting. We did have a nice fourth cutting, but we're just short on hay. Our hay stocks are 35% below what they were last year. And last year we had the third lowest hay stocks that we had on hand since 1950. And so I try to go to my local sale barn. I have a sale barn about a mile from my farm. I try to go on Thursdays if I'm working at home that day, try to watch the prices, and I'm really shocked to see farmers from this area 4 hours away looking for hay, and then have to ship it back. And so we've been working on the drought relief package, and it did pass the House Ag Committee on a 12-0 bipartisan vote this week. It also has $5 million for our loan program that we have at the department that offers zero-interest loans to farmers, and we have been doing those to farmers and livestock farmers. And so the Senate hopefully picked that up, and we can move that through. sooner than later. A few other things we're working on at the legislature are meat processing. That was mentioned by Senator Johnson, and it was an issue before COVID, but when COVID started, everybody started buying locally. It was a great thing. There's some good things that'll come out of COVID. And people started buying freezers, and we ran out of freezers for a while. And so we have a real backlog in our state, in our meat. We have about 300 smaller locker plants around the state. We have permitted 15 or started 15 new ones this year, and that could be custom or equal to. But the problem is we've had grant money is labor too on those smaller plants, because a lot of these plants, we had money from the federal government last year. A lot of the people we'd want to expand, they'd say, oh, I'd love to, but I can't have the workers I have now. Expanding's not going to help me any to build out. So what the legislature did last year, and thanks to Senator Johnson and Representative Keel, we also passed funding for Central Lakes College and Staples and Ridgewater College in Wilmer, and they're starting meat cutting classes for the first time in probably 20 years. We used to have Pipestone and others. The Ridgewater class, or both classes, are filling up for next fall. And those are things that we have to do to try to help build that out. We're also at the department trying to focus on that next or mid-size packer, some that could kill maybe a couple hundred a week. And we have one of those running, and we're looking at trying to build out a couple more of those. And so we're asking for some more grant money from the legislature. Representative Keel mentioned animal disease. We could talk a lot about chronic wasting disease that Senator Johnson mentioned. That's something the Ag Committee looks at a lot. But we do have the African swine fever really right on our shores in Dominican Republic, in Haiti now in the last 6 months. And that's closer to North Carolina when they have a lot of hogs than they are to us. And so when you look at how that travels, we're working really hard with the federal government to the dogs at the airplanes. You saw like the bush meat and things that come in from that's how it travels. It can travel through people shipping all kinds of things. And then the avian influenza 2015. We do have some turkeys up in this area, but that was $1 billion impact to the state of Minnesota. And we have to do everything we can with biosecurity. And so we're all hands on deck, on alert for that, working with all of our poultry farmers. Even as I'm sitting here, we got a new notice that it's in New York State, and working with the USDA Fish and Wildlife Service for watching the fly patterns of the birds, because it probably will be, in a month or so here that it could end up here. And so that's something that we watch really closely. So a few other things I just wanted to mention. The trade is something we're working on quite a bit, or the markets are so interesting. We have a lot of great trade partners. We are starting to, part of the job as commissioner is to do trade delegations, host trade delegations, and that was something we couldn't do in COVID. And so we did a lot of virtual trade missions, but they're not the same. We talk about transactions. A lot of those countries, they want to meet in person, they want to talk. And I think that's helpful that we're getting back to some of that. And so the governor and I led a trade delegation to the United Kingdom and to Finland about 2 months ago. We had 2 farmers from this area, Tim Dufo from Crookston. Tim was working with the wheat growers, and Eric Samuelson with the edible bean, North Harvest beans. Oddly enough, the United Kingdom, that's our #1 export to them, and they would like to continue to import more beans. And then with Brexit, they have an opportunity, we have an opportunity to create a unique relationship with them. We're looking forward to hosting the trade minister here, hopefully in a couple of months. They're very interested in soybean meal and other products. If you think about Finland and the UK, they're about the same size as Minnesota, roughly geographic size. But Finland, Minnesota has 5.7 million people. Finland has 5.5 million people, but the UK has 67 million people. So again, Representative Keel was mentioning we feed the world. They don't have enough food to feed themselves. They would run out of food on August 11th every year if they were going to feed themselves, which I thought that was kind of an interesting subject. So, as we look at opportunities. We see Southeast Asia, the Department of Agriculture with funding from the legislature. We just opened a trade office in Taiwan, and we have a representative there that we're going to be working with. The Corn Growers is also helping us with that. My trade representative, he's in the Middle East right now, in Egypt and Abu Dhabi, working on some good deals, hopefully for us. And so I think that's really an exciting piece. We are watching the input costs this spring, talking with the companies. One of the things we do at the state, because they'll say, what can we do? Working with extension, getting information out there is really important, but we do watch like things like hours of service or trucking. Senator Johnson has done this before where, you know, he'll get a call from the co-op, they'll say they're kind of backed up, and we'll request like an hours of service waiver, and I anticipate that happening this spring, where we're going to want to get that out and moving around this spring quite a bit, because with the trucker shortage and with product, you know, it's interesting though, talking to companies, they do say the product is in place. It's just expensive, you know, too, which is interesting. And I'll be interested to look at my friends within those companies and how their bottom lines end up at the end of this year, because I think that's really interesting when, if it's in place in a lot of areas too, how that's going to work. So, and I have been looking at the trucking situation for about a month, and or maybe 2 months now, meeting with the Truckers Association. It is concerning if there's things that we can do with training or picking up some of that cost, or even, you know, I am surprised that came on right now, and so we are short of truckers. Summertime E15 is another big thing people should be concerned about. We're working on at a state level that currently, with action taken, we would stop E15 sales in the summertime, and we're working on options with that with the EPA. Minnesota, we've set a record on E15 sales this last year, and so that to me is a really big issue. We talked about wolves up in this area. The big decision again this past week to put wolves back on the endangered list. The department does do our grants pays farmers for depredation for wolves and elk. Those are down some. We've also, though, have grants that we've been doing funded by the legislature and the federal government to mitigate, and we do think that is helping some, but you know, we do have a healthy wolf population, and the DNR will be releasing their wolf plan for comment, I would think, pretty soon here. And I hope that the folks up in this area do look at that and comment on that. A couple other things too. I've been watching the Ukraine situation, really interesting as we get up here in the wheat belt on, and I thought that was really fascinating. And we get a lot of workers from the Ukraine, you know, and so that's another thing. A lot of our fruit and vegetable growers, things like that, you know, and so trying to visit with some of those farmers, they're supposed to be coming here in the next month. Well, they might not be coming, and so we've been getting more and more workers in from the Ukraine, as you know, and we get a lot from Mexico, South Africa, countries like that. So that's another interesting thing as well. I don't want to end on I'll end on a harder note than a better note. A couple of things. Mental health, we mentioned that and talked about that, and I just always want to remind people that we have good resources at the department. It's been a tough week. I took calls, was in the middle of a legislative session, hearing, was in another meeting, and luckily I had other people on where I could stop and take a call. You know, and somebody will call you and you see the number come up and you think, I got to take that call. And this has happened to me 2 days back to back where a farmer here in Minnesota took their life, and just didn't see it coming, you know, and you know, you think about, you know, all the resources we have, but this is a pretty tough time of the year. You know, it's, you're working through your finances, you're thinking about next year, it's cold. I get tired of going out to the barn every morning, especially when it's 20 below. You know, and so we want to remind people the resources we have. We have 2 free counselors. We have 10 free farm advocates. We have other resources. Don and Red River Farm Network has done some great pieces, and it's just always good to think about, and a lot of times with some of these folks you got to ask or kind of tell them more than once. And but I just want people to know that. And along with that too, on the plus side, we also have quite a bit of loans and grants at the Department of Agriculture. We have loans for livestock, value-added grants, a lot of things like that. So always look at loans and grants at the Department of Agriculture. We continue to work on many of those type of things. I'm excited, and hopefully we see the smaller soybean facility the soybean growers are working on, and the Epitome project too, I do think is continuing to move forward. They're working with their permitting within the PCA. We do see, as Don said, quite a bit of expansion in the Dakotas, so I'm like, okay, we got to go here in Minnesota too, and so we'll try to keep that going. So with that, last thing I just mentioned is this week we working with the FFA and 4-H unveiled a ag license plate that all the proceeds go, or the proceeds on up and above get split between 4-H and FFA, and the sales just in the first day were very strong. I was with the 4-H state officers and the FFA ambassadors this last week, and they're very excited about it, and I think it's something that is also helpful and positive. So it's good to be up here. I've gotten a lot you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, drive up here, but it's worth it because it's a big state and you got to hear like things that I've heard today. So thanks for having me.
It's fun to see the license plate this week and the photos that you had with the 4-H and FFA. It's tremendous to see that come into fruition. And I personally have to thank you on the support from the Ag Department on our Transformation series. We had a radio podcast series from 2019 into early 21 on mental health, farm stress issues. And thanks to Meg and some of the folks at the Ag Department, we got another grant, and we're starting that project back up again here this spring. So thanks for that, because there certainly is a need. If we can get into questions, I maybe just a wide open one. You've been on the job for a while. We've known each other a long time. What's been your biggest surprise working in this role as Ag Commissioner? Because you certainly have seen it for a long time from afar. What surprised you when you got into that role?
Well, it is really an honor to serve as Ag Commissioner. The biggest surprise for me was COVID. I think for all of us, I just I can't tell you what a curveball it was. If you think about it as Ag Commissioner, if you go back to March of 2020, the first thing people started worrying about, besides toilet paper, was food. And we had empty food at the grocery stores, and then we had the Smithfield plants go down and the JBS plants go down, and we had sick workers at plants, and it just I felt like we had sick workers, and you gotta keep going. Food's gotta keep going, cows gotta get milked. That was a really tough deal. But the one thing I'd say in agriculture in Minnesota is people work together really well. I think our farm groups, our legislators, we try to, our budget bills every year that I've been commissioner have passed unanimously, and they're usually the first bill that's passed. And I think that's been really helpful. And so, but COVID continues, I think, to throw surprises every day. You think that, we're kind of done with it, or it's getting better, and then something, continues to happen. So hopefully we're heading out of it, and we'll see what happens.
There should be some investment with the surplus on a lot of different areas. I know the potato lab in East Grand Forks is getting some work, that much needed work in that area. For ag, do you see some other areas where we're building infrastructure or some things for the long term?
Yeah, and I mentioned that too, and we do have the unique in this area. We do have the potato lab or building in East Grand Forks, and we're trying to do some repairs to that because it does serve the potato industry. Potato industry is not huge in Minnesota, about 50,000 acres, but the value it adds is pretty big, and so, and it's great to have diversity. And so I appreciate you mentioning that, Don, because that's helpful. The drought package is a really big thing. The meat processing, putting more money into our value added, being prepared for animal diseases, those are kind of our bigger asks that we're really focused on. And then we do have an ask on soil health, to try to really help buy and build out some equipment grants for farmers, something the farm groups came to us to ask about. So we'll see what happens. You know, we got a great budget last year in agriculture. You know, the budget, I think the surplus is going to continue to grow in a couple of weeks when it comes out. So however they get the money back, you know, part of that money is going to go back. But I think there's one-time investments that we should look at helping out. And I do think, like drought relief, we could help farmers right now. We really need to pass that bill in the next week, whether it has the DNR or our piece attached to it or not, because it'll take us a month to get checks out to farmers or for farmers to apply, because we have to do a RFP, farmers have to apply, we have to cut the checks. So even if we do it by March 1st, the soonest we'd get money into people's is April 1st. If the legislature waits until May and it's part of the end of the package, or June, then it's July or August, then it's not worth doing. But I know right now from the calls I get, we should help right now. And so we'll see what happens.
We've had some experience on really that process with dairy. I know you've done that in the last session or two. I was surprised to hear the number of dairies that we're still continuing to lose. But is this drought package similar to what we had on the dairy plan?
Yeah, it is, and thanks, Don. And 2 years ago, the legislature passed a package to help our dairy farmers, and it did help. You know, like I say, those numbers that we had, and so you go back 2 years. 2 years ago, after we did that, and by the way, when we did those dairy checks, about 2,000 to dairy farmers, I would have dairy farmers come up to me, and they might have got $1,700 or $3,000 that, you know, these people may have milked 40 cows or whatever. They'd be like crying because they would just say, I wasn't expecting it, and I could pay my feed bill, or I could get this guy off my back, and it just did help. So if you go back 2 years, I'd open that thing every week. We started to gain dairy farmers. We did not lose a dairy farmer for this first 6 months of 2020. Then COVID started to hit, though, and you know, people started buying differently. We're having issues right now with supply chain with schools and milk, and so it really messed up the supply chain. And then with the drought last summer, it just accelerated the sell-offs.
No doubt. Questions from the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Leaf. And, you know, we were really interested when we went to the UK because they've started to import ethanol from the United States, and just this last year. And the UK is interesting because they just put you know, we have a E10 mandate here, but we can actually go to E15. The UK just put an E10 mandate on their fuels, and they are going to electric cars and doing very similar to us, but they also they want to reduce greenhouse gases, and they look at for easiest way to do that, and the quickest way to do it is to use a biofuel. And so it was really good to see, because we had just got there, so we had the president of Corn Growers, Brian Biegler, with us, and others. We went to a couple gas stations and looked at the signage, and really interesting to meet with them to see that they're adopting and looking what we've done, but to get the greenhouse gas reduction. And then Finland, also very, you know, if you want to call it a progressive country or something like that, they have an E85 incentive. You know, kind of remember when we had our cash for clunkers? You can trade in a car to get an E85 car and get like a $2,000 tax credit. And so I was really excited to see that. And then biodiesel too. I think biodiesel is just changing quite a bit. There's a lot has been said with renewable diesel. A lot of that renewable diesel is going out to California, though, to meet those new markets and standards. So it's kind of a mix on how this is all going to play out. So, but there's just a tremendous opportunities right now. But it is a little harder because the market's strong. When corn is $7 or something, the margins do get tighter. And we've had other issues with rail and things like that. But it's good, Leaf. There's a lot going on.
Other questions? Yes.
I haven't read the latest ruling, and it's something that I've worked on for a long time. Like I said, I live in, there's really in the wolf range in our state, the most kills we get, because the Department of Ag pays the claims, so I look really close at them, is really in my area in Pine County, and then Roseau and just north of here are the two hot spots in the state. And we continue to have this, and so what I think it is too is it's a process that was followed or wasn't followed sometimes, is what the judges, and this has been going on for we were working on press releases on this, and I was telling our staff, I said, you can just go back and look at what we've said over the years, because it comes and goes, and I think we'll have to continue to look at it. Our administration too has also felt that we have a healthy wolf population, and we'll see. I don't know what's in the DNR's new report yet myself. We've worked on and commented on. I encourage a lot of you to look at it, but I'd encourage you to talk to your federal representatives about this, because we do have a healthy population in our state here. Yep. No, I agree. I've long felt that. Like I said, I was just telling Mr. Gustus, I've never seen a wolf in my area, but my neighbors have had kills. My wife's seen them. My mom that lives across from us, and it's devastating, because wolves are interesting too. A lot like elk too. They'll sit on a certain area. Some farms will never experience a loss, and others have it year after year after year.
Other questions? Yes, John. Question about the permit process?
Yeah, and I just want to comment too real quick on the aviation flu. I'm too focused on the avian influenza right now. Aviation fuel. I actually went down to Southwest Minnesota and met with Delta, and the amount of fuel that they would buy, and they're working with the Gevo plant down there, is really exciting. And that they're working on, that's going to be transformational. Just even 10% of their fuel will really be a big key for us. And then on the permitting, the permitting for that is usually done, and that one in particular is done with the PCA, and then the DNR has some there too and everything. A lot of times what I do is that's not with the Department of Agriculture, but I kind of try to insert myself into it as much as I can. To try to, because like I said, I want to be competitive. So that's one where I've been trying. That's kind of, I feel like my role is to kind of, tell the PCA, check on them, say, hey, what's going on here? Can we move this along? And so on a lot of different projects. And so they have a good permitting efficiency, in general, this last year in moving those through. But I think there's some that, we have to be unique. We have to be competitive as a state. When I became commissioner, we lost a big shrimp project. This was in the previous administration, but I'm still meeting with them. I'm trying to get them back to Minnesota. But we have to be competitive against the Dakotas.
Other questions? Yes.
Since there's four major meat packing companies, and two of them are foreign owned, Brazil and China, I know these small little ones are helpful, but it takes, a minimum of 200 million to get one that's kind of competitive. And I mean, the old one out of John Morrell, you're talking thousands of bucks an hour. What can the state do to help? I was listening to a farm report down in Iowa. They said, a finished steer, the guy had maybe broke even or lost, and the profit for the packers. And I'm not against profit at all. I just think there's a monopoly here, and they were talking $700 to $900 profit. Is there anything that can be helped? Some competition on the packing side?
Yeah, and like I said, that's like one of our priorities, and we have to try to see, so we use at our department value-added grants, and then we use grants through the Department of Economic Development. We did start a new plant in the last year and a half here in COVID in the state, a US 212 beef in Buffalo Lake, and they're killing quite a bit of cattle. They need workers, and so, but it's really exciting to see that coming together. But they also need some permitting work. They had some water issues. They had to pump water from a nearby town, and so we try to help them with that. The federal government is coming out with a lot of $1 million, $800 million for meat packing processing. And the part of it is to help build that mid-size, because what you're talking about, there are probably, I would say, and the people I know that are in the pipeline, there's maybe 3 and 2 that are very serious. One in the Twin Cities, it's hard to find a spot in the cities where you can kill 100 cows a week or 200 cows a week, and it's like, if we can find a spot, I got a guy who is ready to go. Don made a point too, where we need our rural development director. I've been like very, vocal with Secretary Vilsack that we got to get these appointments going, because that money is going to come through the USDA rural development, and we need to promote that and get Minnesota's share of that, of those dollars. And so I, from the Department of Agriculture, I promote my programs, but I'm really promoting the USDA because they have more dollars, but I need them here promoting what they have too. So I'd say stay tuned, because if we can put some of these together, we're going to have some of that, and hopefully it takes pressure off. And I'd say that, to the big guys, they have the world market too, and so they'll be fine, but we have a lot of different things that we can fill.
Tom, you mentioned interaction with PCA. How much interaction is there between things like transportation and all the other agencies that impact agriculture or rural Minnesota, interaction that you have with those other agency leads?
There's quite a bit, and I think that we do a cabinet meeting maybe once a week, and then we do like a cabinet huddle for the commissioners that can make it once a week or once every 2 weeks in the morning. But then, we do talk a lot about, because I'd say on average about 25% of the calls I get from farmers and businesses have nothing to do with what I do at the Department of Agriculture. They have to do with a wetland, a tax problem, a commerce problem, a banking problem, a revenue problem, so I have to talk to the other commissioners and try to be an advocate in that role. And so there's a lot of that. I'm also, other than maybe the IRRB commissioner and now the new education commissioner, I'm the only commissioner that really lives outside of the 494 Beltway. So I think a lot of times I feel like I'm the kind of one in there who's saying, it's a little different here. We got to kind of do this, and everything. So I think it's always fascinating.
Interesting. More questions? Yes.
Dominican Republic and Haiti, yeah, which is right by Puerto Rico, so yeah.
We don't have a guarantee of anything.
Yeah, kind of talking about that issue of foreign animal
Yeah,
diseases.
no, there's a lot right now, but I would say of any state, we're as prepared as any state because a lot of states look to us because we've had bovine tuberculosis up in this area. You remember not that long ago, we had to sell off herds and quarantine. We had avian influenza. 2020, we killed almost 450,000 hogs. Those were healthy hogs, but we went through the process. Minnesota got hit the hardest in COVID when the Smithfield plant went down. That was, 20,000 hogs a day, but 13,000 a day were coming from Minnesota. A week later, the JBS plant went down. That was 16,000 a day. And then some of the other plants, we were down 35,000 hogs a day that had nowhere to go. And those hogs backed up extremely quickly. And what it allowed us to do is to do all kinds of exercises on how to prepare for that, how to implement that. So a lot of the other states look to Minnesota. We're as prepared as any state. We have the equipment, we have the knowledge, and hopefully we'll never have to use it. But we have other states that look at us and say, how do you guys do that? How are you prepared? But we have great veterinarians, and again, we have a great partnership. The University of Minnesota, the ag organizations, the companies, we meet regularly, and that's one of the best parts of the job too, is that I feel confident when I have to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking about this. I can sleep good at night on that. I can go back to bed because I know we have a good team, but it's a concern, and all people should be worried about both of those diseases. These are not confinement only. If you look at China, have you ever seen the videos of going down a town like Boston where everybody has pigs and the dead pigs are piled up right at everybody's place? The notice I got today from New York is a backyard bird flock. It's not a confinement operation. And so this is why we're trying to educate everybody to be prepared for these diseases. And we know a lot more about biosecurity too as well. So,
No doubt. Could you do some regionalization if an animal disease came in?
and we do have regionalization plans, in place for that. But if it gets to North Carolina, I'll be honest with you, it's most likely going to get here, and so that is what we're being told. We can do everything we can and hope we can keep it out, but if you look at how it's traveled before, it's moved in sandwiches, it's moved in boots, all kinds of just things that are going to be very difficult. And that's why you see sometimes confinement operations are almost more prepared to deal with it than somebody who raises 30 hogs, because you shower in, you shower out. It's very controlled on who goes in and out of those buildings, like a pipestone system. And so it's very concerning because that's how it's moved through Europe as well. So we'll see, and it is impressive. Have you ever seen what the dogs do at the airports? And we've limited workers on farms and different things like that. So, yeah, we'll see.
Tom, you're so very accessible. We appreciate all the miles you put on and spending your weekend here in Boston. We appreciate you coming up here and being here today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Tom Peterson, again, Commissioner, Agriculture Commissioner here in the great state of Minnesota. Again, our KKCQ Ag Forum, Farm Forum today. Appreciate all the speakers that we've had and the great audience we've had as well. My thanks to Leif and Don and all the crew at R&J Broadcasting as well for hosting this great event. So please show your appreciation and have a great day and safe travels home.